up I think what's been a very successful day. And for us, in terms of the branch, just to give you, before we have our next contributor, which is Eilis Ryan, Councillor Eilis Ryan, we just want to give you a bit of background in relation to the redevelopment of the organisation up to now. As everybody knows, we did agree to contest the last local elections, and in the Dublin area, even though we weren't successful, we decided to take the learnings from that election and try to apply them. And that meant talking to people who are both inside and outside the Workers' Party, and people who had been around for a long time, and maybe some people we hadn't seen in a while. So we felt that it was an opportune time to actually examine ourselves critically and to look at the organisation and see what is the Workers' Party for. And you know, anyone who has been around, anyone who knows anything about politics, unless an organisation is delivering something, it's going nowhere. So we decided that we were going to start by building on what we had, which was commitment and a little bit of knowledge. I think Paddy touched on some of that earlier on, and a bit of experience. So we began by bringing people together at branch meetings, and they were very successful. I mean, I've been at union meetings for 20 years, and some of these meetings were better attended and much more constructive and much more focused on the debate. So a programme was developed, and part of the programme was to relaunch the branch and to re-engage with the community where we come from, and that's what this is about. This is one of the steps. There's a number of steps to be taken during the year. So a key part of what we were talking about is the actual condition of the city, the condition of housing, which we touched on earlier on, economic, industrial, etc. But we're delighted to move it on a little bit now, because we have Councillor Eilis Ryan here who's going to give the next presentation. And on this session, we're going to look at urban development. And we have two speakers. We have Eilis and we have Finnegan. And both of these women have experience in dealing with urban development. And in fact, Anne is that experienced in urban development that she's got plenty of solicitors' letters and things like that to her name, threats from former officials and councillors in relation to urban development, and especially in relation to Quarryvale and places like that. And some of the graphics that are around will show in relation to a document that was produced for the Flood Tribunal, and I think Anne and Mick Finnegan had a huge role to play in that. And that document, I remember going to see Mr. Justice Flood, following the General Secretary asked me to meet him at the time, and I think it was the early 90s, and he asked were we willing to stand over everything in it, and that there may be people out there who may be suing us over it. And we said, well then, it must be true. And he didn't say it wasn't. So we're going to start off this session with Eilis.
Thank you. Okay. So thanks very much, first of all. So just to say, I mean, compared certainly to Anne, I don't have lots and lots of experience in this area at all. So what I'm presenting is really what I've learned myself over the last number of weeks and months reading about the subject. But I'm very conscious there's people in this room who have a decent amount more experience than me, and probably there's a few mistakes in what I'm going to say as well. So I suppose the broad theme that we're going to look at, that I'm going to look at, is basically what would urban policy and urban planning look like from a socialist perspective. My own area is the North Inner City, which is quite specific in terms of how it's made up and in terms of how you might plan for it, and I think that's probably influenced my perspectives on things as well. So I suppose just to start, a very obvious point is that the cities are probably where you see inequalities most obviously. So just a couple of minutes down the road from here, if you walk eastwards, you come to the IFSC, which is obviously the pinnacle of Celtic Tiger neoliberal capitalism, and right next to it and right kind of entrenched within it in different pockets are some of the most underprivileged communities in the country. The area is consistently held up as a good example for how regeneration happens, how urban planning in underprivileged areas should happen, and it's quite clear to the people who've always lived there that that's just not the case. So the inequalities that we see everywhere in our society are more evident in cities. The geographer Neil Smith talked about the current economic crisis as a crisis of city building. And I think there was a couple of points that him and other people have made around the role of cities in the economic crisis and in capitalism more generally. The first one is obviously just the nature of speculation and the role that speculation and finance and property development played in creating the economic bubble which has brought us to where we are. And so there's obviously a huge density of potential to make profit in a place like the North Inner City, and that's exploited. So the cities and the development of cities have really played a huge role in the crisis. And in Ireland, this is probably more so the case than in many places. So a report that was done on the role of planning in the economic crisis said that planning should have acted as the counterbalance to the excessive pressures for development, working for the common good to produce sustainable patterns. And instead, policy formation was overtly shaped by the neoliberal policies adopted particularly since 1997. And the report recommended that there should be an inquiry into the role that planning played in the crisis, the same way as there has been into banking. It's not something that has happened, and I think it would be something interesting to push for. A second reason that people talk about the importance of cities to capitalism and also to socialism as a result are that they're the places, the increase in urbanisation has produced a huge outlet for capital surplus. So there's a huge potential to commodify pretty much everything. And what we've seen is that many of the things people hoped would lead to decent urban development, things like, for example, neighbourhood parks and amenities, they're just gradually being privatised. So there's some big urban developer that I don't know the name of in New York who talks about how we used to think that the best way to make money was Coca-Cola, it was the big brand. And actually more and more you're seeing the things that we associate with the lives we might want, things like your neighbourhood park, under lock and key, and something you can only access if you have money. So in that sense, cities and small communities in cities are becoming more and more commodified. And so it really is a battleground for socialists and people who are interested in building a socialist city. And I suppose the key thing is how do you do that in a way that's different to the kind of pretty gentrification that you see in places like where I live in Stoneybatter, where things change but not in a way that's equal and not in a way that's inclusive. So I suppose just to look backwards a little bit at the nature of how urban planning has tended to happen in Dublin. 1963 was the first time that a local Development Act talking about urban planning was introduced in Ireland. And what you saw was that planning was seen as this communist European notion that was going to be brought in to quash people's rights to develop their property. And that was really the nature of the Oireachtas debates around urban planning. And you can see that here. This is the minister who really had to battle to get any form of urban planning legislation through at all, and did so by watering it down completely. And what he said in his speech introducing the final legislation to the Dáil was that property values must be preserved and, wherever possible, enhanced in the planning system in Ireland. And that's really what has held until now. So we've had what's called a developer-led model, which focuses on the need for a developer with private financing in order to develop any part of the city that we want to change. And the impact of that, obviously, is that only the things that are profitable tend to happen. So we have these great plans. Lorraine, before the break, was talking about the great aspirations that we see in most of our city development documents. But the aspects of them that happen are the ones that can produce profit. And because the city has become so reliant on private financing, nothing else can take place apart from those things that are profitable. So a good example of that would be the social housing quotas that are put in place as a way of increasing the stock of social housing and affordable housing. They're there, there's 20% quota demanded of every single private developer, and yet they just don't happen. And despite the legislation, because the government has absolutely no way of developing the city except with private finance, it has no way to come back to this. So Devaney Gardens, right beside where I live, has a great plan attached to it, and once the private financing fell through, planning and development simply can't happen. So that's the nature of how development tends to take place in Ireland. And so since the crash, there has been an awful lot of talk about, when I Googled, having learned about developer-led planning for the first time a few months ago, and Googled the term, really all you find are politicians criticising it, you know. So Jan O'Sullivan, for example, talked recently about developer-led planning has been a disaster. We need to rebuild confidence in the planning system. And so there is this aspiration, but really nothing has changed. So as I said, there hasn't been an inquiry which has been recommended several times into the role of planning in the economic crisis. Equally, the Mahon report recommended the establishment of an Office of Planning Regulation, and what's been established falls well short of what the Mahon report recommended. And I suppose perhaps the biggest sign that little has changed in terms of urban planning in Ireland is the role of NAMA. So NAMA obviously is the biggest property owner and landowner in the country at the moment, and its stated objective is quite simply to recoup as much of the state's money as it possibly can. So it's enshrined in the legislation of NAMA that nothing can take precedence over its need to make profits. And the single best way for it to do that is to encourage massive international investment in property in Ireland, and that's exactly the road that it's pursuing. The likelihood that that will create problems for any other, I suppose, aspirations that might be introduced, you can look to the way that NAMA managed to lobby against changes to our upward-only rent reviews, which certainly prevent an awful lot of less profitable development in Dublin. And NAMA single-handedly undermined the potential for that to change by basically saying this is going to put off the kinds of investors that we want to bring back the money the state has ploughed into banks. So really there's very little evidence that anything has particularly changed. So I'm just going to look through, I'm actually just going to flick through all these slides. Just going to look at, I suppose, what might the solutions to this be. And there's 5 areas that I've outlined. The second 3, I suppose I'm going to go backwards. The second 3 focus on keeping the city public, so prioritising municipal use of space, prioritising municipal services. The 4th one there is using urban policy to build inclusion, and really what that means is looking at an area and planning for the amenities that it needs. It means planning for a childcare facility next to a school, and next to a school and a workplace, planning for the amenities that we need, so that there aren't pockets of people who can access services and people who can't. And really all the evidence is that the only way you can achieve that, the only way you can achieve people from different socio-economic groups using the same services and using the same amenities is through plan-led development that doesn't depend on profitable private financing to take place. And the third area is just how we can use urban policy to enhance environmental sustainability. The Workers' Party in its recent water policy put a big emphasis on how you might actually have an environmentally sustainable water policy, which obviously is nothing like what's been introduced in the name of environmental sustainability here. And transport is a very good example. Also, our transport system at the moment basically serves people living in suburbs to come into their jobs in the city centre and nothing else. And there's some very good examples of how you might do that differently. So I guess that's all the good stuff. You know, it's very obvious that's what we want from our city. And I was writing my notes, deciding whether to say this, but that's why I almost joined the Green Party when I was 18. Because, you know, who doesn't agree with public transport? I mean, it's a good thing. And but the more interesting question for us is how do you get to those good things? And the reality is that you can put them down in documents all that you want, and they simply don't happen unless you address the structural factors that are preventing them from taking place. And so there's two significant, more structural measures in terms of urban planning that I think are really important for the party to consider developing policies around. Probably the most important is introducing measures to control the value of land in the city. So, you know, a lot of you will be much more familiar with how this works than I am. But land in Ireland, the value of land, it fluctuates depending on, I suppose, mostly depending on the amenities that surround it and the demand for land at the time. And that doesn't make any sense for a couple of reasons. The first one being that it's in fixed supply, it's not going to increase anytime soon, so there's no point expecting it to respond to supply and demand the way other things do. The second reason, probably more significantly, is that really when an empty piece of land in the north inner city certainly increases in value, it has nothing to do with the person who owns it. It's all of the amenities and the communities that mostly the public have built up around it and the state has built up around it that lead to that increase. So really, until we put something in place to control the value of land, it's not going to be possible to deliver any of those other good things that the Green Party might like to deliver. And I suppose a very simple way to do that would be the introduction of a site value tax. I'm not going to go into the details of it. Dara, who's around, can answer all questions about the site value tax. But basically it's a tax on undeveloped land that Dara can insert the appropriate sentence. I think the principle of controlling the value of land is the important thing. And then the second area is around reforming local government. So David Harvey wrote very interestingly about, we were talking a lot about cooperatives before the break. Obviously one of the risks is that they become these little isolated self-sustaining states where you can do nice things within them, but it doesn't escalate up. And he has put forward that a democratically run city is a very good way to deal with that problem. That at one stage London, under its most left-leaning Labour government in the 70s, was getting to a stage where really it could start to reconfigure the economy because the local government had sufficient power to think about how it would invest its money. So reformed local government, which would mean some sort of an equitable way of raising revenue, combined with something like a directly elected mayor that has democratic power over the decisions that are taken, particularly in a city that is genuinely left-wing, like Dublin tends to vote, could have huge power in supporting the type of economy that we want at a local level. So I suppose you know that's the basic outline of some things we could think about. And I think that this is a map of a special development zone that's been put in place down towards the IFSC, down beyond it in the Docklands area. I just wanted to draw attention to it. The special development zone is a planning mechanism that's used by Dublin City Council to basically get rid of all of the standard planning practice that allows communities and non-capitalist interests to influence the planning process in some way. The special development zones completely suspend all of that. And a friend of mine put it to me recently that basically the function of it is that it makes the planning process entirely predictable for investors. So it takes away all of the local and political uncertainties about what might happen and to cause international investment in particular to go wrong. And I think this is in probably one of the most unequal areas of the city, in the sense that there is massive amounts of money right next to huge poverty, and the people who are living in the area are extremely opposed to it. The reason it's significant, and I wanted to draw attention to it, is that I think it's important to remember the lengths that need to be that our government currently and our council currently need to go to undermine democracy in order to achieve what they want to achieve. Because the reality is, if planning was governed democratically, and if our city was governed democratically, there's absolutely no way that the kind of development that's planned for this area would go ahead. And I think it's frustrating in the sense that it's so easy at the moment for the council to undermine democratic planning. But on the other hand, I think it shows that they know they have something to be fearful of. In this area, there are very well organised communities who are ready to contribute to a democratic planning system, and there are huge amounts of legislation being put in place to make sure that they're not able to do it. And I think there's definitely a role for our party in thinking about how to get past that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.